appreciate all the very nice things you guys said about my light up vest. Thank you so much. And to be honest with you, I'm a little reluctant to repeat a gag, especially when, it went over so well. But how can I not wear this for the spoiler review? And I'm excited to talk to you about this movie. It's not for everyone. Some people are like, no, thank you, clearly, as we can see when the review embargo lifted. But I think that there's some really cool stuff to talk about. Maybe some of you will be convinced to go check the movie out once you get a little spoilers. And then also, of course, some of you will use this as a way not to have to see the movie. Whatever, man, you do you. All right, so yes, hello and welcome to my spoiler review of Tron Ares, where we actually have a lot to talk about, especially the very strong setup for a potential Tron 4. Ooh, who's going to tell Jared Leto? That's okay. They could make a Tron 4 without a Jared Leto, maybe. We'll see. Because the best Easter egg, the one I think everyone's going to want to see people... Well, there's two really good ones, and neither one really includes Jared Leto. All right, so my favorite was the one that involved Julian Dillinger. Again, the grandson of the villain of the first movie, with his grandfather's painting staring at everybody, throughout the movie in the office. All right, so at the very end of the film... Julian Dillinger got his mom killed, right? Athena was like, you're in my way. Bloop. That was cool. And he's about to be arrested, right? And he cuts it real close. The police, they storm the building, guns drawn, and they discover Dillinger being digitized and entering the grid right before their eyes. That was a really cool shot. Maybe it should have been the beginning of the third act. Oh, well. But I loved it. I thought it was super cool. I was like, Dillinger, baby, you're starting to get really interesting. And it got even more interesting because in the mid-credit scene, he materialized on the grid. And as he takes hold of his identity disc, which everyone needs to survive on the grid, he pulsates with energy and we get a glimpse of the same armor worn by the Sark program back in the original film. A program written by his grandfather, which is why it looked like his grandfather. It's interesting. Since in the original Tron, since programs look like the person who wrote them, shouldn't the Ares program have therefore looked like Evan Peters and then maybe turned into Jared Leto as it started to gain independence? I'm just saying. All right, so anyway. Now that's an Easter egg. I didn't remember the first film that well, but I remembered that armor. And when we saw that glimpse of it, I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. What a callback. And then I went and looked into it. So this is the Sark Armor, and they could do an upgraded version of that for a potential fourth film, which I think would be really cool. I think it has samurai inspirations. And here's some cool samurai Tron artwork I found online. Send that to the costume department. And then also, did you notice throughout the film Dillinger's digital tattoos? They never did anything with that. I saw him peeking out of his work clothes. I thought they were cool. I mean, at some point, those have got to light up, right? Right? I think they should. All right, so in the original film, in many ways, Sark was Ares, right? And the Master Control program was Dillinger's, Wizard of Oz face in this movie. So both Sark and Master Control are written by Grandpa Dillinger, and the Ares program was written by Julian Dillinger, as we just said first off. But then, of course, it gains independence over the course of the film. And I guess to some degree, the ending here is also ironic because, Julian Dillinger becomes like a security program, just like Ares and Sark before him. So, but those were written programs. And now as a human, he's become the program as well. And that begs the question, is Julian Dillinger going to wear the Sark program armor, or is the Sark program armor going to wear him, right? Like, what benefit would it get from teaming up with an actual organic human host? Especially now that we've created a world where computer programs can be printed out organically in the real world. We're going to talk about that. Sark is also very popular with the fans, even beyond the Tron movies, because, hey, it's Disney. He's shown up in a couple of other places as well, because Disney loves to, exploit, potato, right? Some people would say exploit. Some people would say get the most out of, it depends if you're a fan or not. All right. So I also wonder if the ghost of his grandfather is in the machine, just like the ghost of Flynn is still on Flynn's old server, as we see in the movie. Maybe we'll get that answer as well in Tron 4, if there's a Tron 4. All right, so what's the other great teaser that they set up for a potential next Tron movie? So, one of the biggest questions I saw coming into Tron Ares was, are Sam and Quorra going to show up? I mean, sure, it would be nice, I guess, to see Sam, but I think people really are interested in Quorra. Who's Quorra? Well, Quorra was a program on the grid that wasn't written by a user, a person in the real world. She just appeared, right? It's like the Tron version of Jurassic Park's Life Will Find a Way, right? So it was almost as if she'd been created by a higher power. And so, the original Flynn in the Tron Legacy movie, was mentoring her and had felt like she was like this new life form. They were calling them ISOs, right? And in the end of Tron Legacy, she jumps to the real world. And I believe in the world of Tron becomes the first computer program to become a real live person. And while Sam and Quorra don't appear in Tron Ares, at the end of the movie, Ares, who's become himself a real person and is living off the grid, pun intended, as he says, he has a picture of an older Quorra who's alone, right? Like he has a picture of her and Sam from the end of the movie, when they first came back to the real world together after being on the grid. But then he has an older Quorra who's by herself and seems to also be on the run and also living a simple technology-free life, which is, I guess, how she's managed to stay off the radar for so long. It's heavily implied that Ares is going to try and find her. Quorra is a very popular character, not only because she looked cool in the last movie, Tron Legacy, but because she was also a character on the animated series. One of you, I was talking in my non-spoiler review about how so many of you seem to love this Tron animated series, and somebody said, it's like the Clone Wars. How Clone Wars made a lot of Star Wars fans, who, originally people rejected the prequels, but thanks to the Clone Wars, they've got this legion of fans. And someone made the comparison that that's what the Tron animated series has done for Tron, which I thought was fascinating. And Quorra was a big part of that. So sure, Olivia Wilde has become a little problematic these days, but so is Jared Leto. He should love having her back. He should be like, hey, if she gets to come back, I get to come back. Although I don't know about Quorra ditching her signature look, right? I mean, when she came out into the real world at the end of the last movie, she still had it. Like, she just looks like Olivia Wilde. That's really uncool. I hope they don't keep that. I'm not a fan of that at all. So those are the two big reveals for a potential sequel. How's that sound to you? Would you like to continue the story in this fashion? Or, as some are saying, is it time to reboot Tron? You don't even have to reboot it. The grid's a big place. You can literally write a new program. So they could always just explore a different corner of it. So, speaking of the grid, I loved going back to the original grid from the first film. To me, this was an excellent surprise. I hadn't seen any of the shots from any teasers or clips that after I went to my screening, I happened to see on the internet. And, it's a tough call. Do you put it out there to try and get Tron superfans, to really make sure they go and check out the movie in theaters? Or do you try and make it a surprise? What would you do? Having seen the film, or if you didn't see the film, like how much do you give away? It's the eternal question when advertising a movie. It's funny when you go back and you watch old trailers, like for movies from like the 40s and 50s, they'll show stuff like from the end of the movie. I think this is probably even old, these days we go through trailers frame by frame, thanks to the advancements, speaking of advancements in technology, where of course, back then, either you saw it or you didn't, and, it just went by. That's a very interesting difference as well. All right. So I thought it was a great surprise. And I like that Ares wasn't dismissive of the original grid. I mean, obviously he didn't want to get stuck in a world of 1980s technology, but it meant something to him. And I loved that joke, by the way, when Eve's colleague was making fun of the low tech of the 80s and then was like, oh, I'm sorry for making fun of your ancestors. That was great. And that's exactly how Ares viewed the original grid, as his heritage. I thought that was really nice. And it was also interesting that even as a computer program himself, he didn't view this Flynn that he met as the real Flynn. Like, he had some question about it. So, you know, it was more like a shadow of Flynn. That was the impression I got from Flynn, from, you know, Computer Flynn's answer, right? Like, that's an interesting commentary on AI. Like, if something starts out as an AI, well, then it's real. But if it's an AI copy of something that started out as a human, an organic being, well, then it's just, again, a copy of them, a shadow. And I think I'm not quite sure what the distinction was there, right? Again, I'm making some parallels to Alien Earth. I talked about that in my non-spoiler review. And that's something that Alien Earth has started to at least try to begin to explore, right? Like, if you transfer the consciousness of a human into a synthetic body, is that still the same human? It's an interesting question. You know, as I said for my Alien Earth coverage, there's some question about reincarnation, right? Like, is it the same as that? I'll be curious what your thoughts are on it. Do you think that was truly Flynn? Or again, just like a shadow of Flynn? But as we all know from the previous films, in Tron Legacy, it was truly, you know, Flynn who had been digitized. Instead of being transferred to a synthetic body, he was just uploaded onto the grid. And he really believed in the sanctity of AI life forms because he felt, you know, once all uploaded to the grid, they were all the same. And then especially as he began to see programs evolving or appearing out of thin air, not written by anybody. And I guess the next step would be to have that quality that you can't explain. And that's literally what happens with Ares. Because Ares is like, Flynn's like, Ares, why do you like Depeche Mode so much? And Ares starts to try to explain it. An 80s band, great choice with a technological bent to it. And Ares says there's just something about it he can't explain, he can't describe. It's just a feeling that he has. And that's, of course, I think a very, like, how would you, I guess that's the ghost in the machine, to borrow another terminology that, and I think the ghost in the machine is the humanity and the spirit and the soul, and almost the ghost in the machine of ourselves, if you view the biological body as a machine of sorts as well. Oh, very interesting, right? And then also in the real world, Ares is caught off guard by the feeling of raindrops. I wondered why that was. Was it because they're random? They're not, there's no like digital pattern to them, right? I mean, but very often science does find patterns in nature and it's not random. So I'm not sure. Does anyone know about the falling of rain? Is it random or a pattern? But that really not only caught him off guard, but it's even something that kind of jolted Athena and stopped her in her attack on Eve when the sprinklers go off in the building, the sensation of rain. And then also Ares, when he sees the fireflies, which is a nice choice because their butts light up too. And so he's, mesmerized by that as well. Maybe their flight patterns are random, the inexplicability of it all. That's very interesting. Because for instance, since in this movie, 3D printers have the ability to print out now organic life forms, what would differentiate the computer printed organic life form from one that was made the old fashioned way, right? Like, is there that's a very difficult question, but I mean, like, what's the spark, and if you print out a program versus say a program that's become independent or a program that's an ISO that mysteriously appeared like Quorra, like what are the differences? And it's a very complex question for a Disney franchise film. like we better call up Christopher Nolan here, man, or something like that. Like Inception, which had me questioning reality for about 24 to 48 hours after seeing the movie. But, I guess, what is that differentiation? And I guess they're saying it's that spark. So yes, let's talk about 3D printers, which are so cool in this movie. So what's the plot of Tron Ares? Well, you've got ENCOM, Flynn's old company, which is now run by Greta Lee as the CEO. And then there's Dillinger Systems, which is the company that was founded by the villain from the first movie after he got kicked out of ENCOM at the end of Tron. And that's, it's a little bit, well, there's two things I want to say about this. First off, that's funny because Jeff Bridges basically went on to play Dillinger in Iron Man. And then another generation of his just showed up in Ironheart, very much the way a new generation of Dillingers shows up to wreak havoc in this movie. And I think Alden Ehrenreich and Evan Peters have a similar vibe. So that's very funny. All right, then also, it's almost like Apple versus Microsoft in a way. And I really liked how this movie captured how tech companies are in the world today. Like they can seem very innocuous and just for fun, like with gaming, but they're actually much more serious and insidious in the grip that they're getting on the world, right? I mean, I thought that was fascinating. And also, of course, that big question of, you can't stop technology from evolving. So what's really important is, who controls it, who wields it, who's responsible enough. With great power comes great responsibility and all that. But then also when they pointed to games briefly, I thought that was very interesting because that's another thing, it's something that Toy Story 5 is about to explore, that we're voluntarily putting ourselves on the grid these days as best we can. Like if there was a way to actually digitize ourselves and go on the grid, so many people would take advantage of that and maybe not want to come out. The two-way street that they set up between the digital, they call it a bridge here, between the digital world and the real world, I think is really fascinating. I think it's also fascinating that some of the criticisms I've seen of this movie is they don't spend enough time in the fake world, right? I mean, I guess you could say, well, this is a movie and people want fantasy, but it's like, isn't that kind of a problem we have in real life when people aren't interested in the real world anymore and they want to spend as much time as possible in the fantasy world? There's your storyline for Tron 4, maybe, right? Or as I said, just go watch the upcoming Toy Story 5. Anyway, in this movie, ENCOM and Dillinger Systems are in a race to find the Permanence Code, which was written by Kevin Flynn, which will allow, but is now missing. He hid it, which will allow the things that each company prints out in 3D to last longer than 29 minutes. Because currently what happens is they derez, which is lingo from Tron, basically disintegrate. ENCOM is interested in printing out food and plants and medicine, whereas Dillinger Systems wants to print out weapons and actual soldiers. I don't know why it just didn't print out what do they call him? Optimus, that robot from the Elon, speaking of tech companies. I wonder, is Elon Musk an ENCOM or a Dillinger? I think, I think it's all a matter of perspective for a lot of people. That's really interesting. But yeah, so I don't know why they had, even the Terminators were printed out as, their endoskeletons, right? I think that's the term. No, that's on the outside. But yeah, they have the metal skeletons and then they just have to layer over the biological material otherwise. But yeah, I was surprised when they had the presentation at the beginning of the movie and they're like, here's our soldier. And I was like, how does he have flesh and skin? And why would you give him flesh and skin? I'm just sending him out to the battlefield. And as the big point in the movie is that he's expendable. And, Ares doesn't like hearing that. But he always comes back as himself until, of course, they decide not to bring back Cameron Monaghan, making a lot of Cameron Monaghan fans upset. All right. So anyway, so ENCOM's CEO Eve, she doesn't even know that you can print out a human. It probably never even occurred to her. But there's a lot of money, I bet, in printing out humans, right? Because think of the implications of that. Then, if you could print out a person physically, there goes the argument that, don't talk to a chatbot. It's not real. That's not a real interaction. Well, if you can produce a physical entity that can interact with you in the real world, it certainly will feel real, although you could probably still put on the restrictions that you want to. Look how Athena couldn't break her programming, even though Ares could. So you could print out a person that could only operate in the parameters that you set. Oh, that's horrible. But I think a lot of people would like that. That's just crazy. And also, if you can print out anything you want, right, from people to natural resources, how do things not very quickly spin out of control? Because some limitations are the only thing that is keeping everything in check. We already have overpopulation problems as it is. What if people are to start printing out people on top of that, right? And then, what about natural resources? Also, surplus. We have a real garbage problem on this planet, right? What about devaluing certain things because, the laws of supply and demand? Like take something that we actually do print right now, money. That has to be very closely guarded and handled so that, the value of money is controlled. It's all, again, these are bigger questions than a Disney holiday or action movie is going to answer. But I mean, they're very, very interesting. And the fact that the movie touches on them at all, I think is pretty cool. But now let's talk about how 3D printers are actually used in the movie. To me, the coolest thing by far about 3D printers was when at the end of the movie, the computer programs took control of the lasers themselves to just print them, to print themselves. Like, a human didn't need to press print. They were like, it was like basically the computer Tron version of when the little girl climbs out of the TV at the end of The Ring, right? They were like, I'm coming out. That was great. Like the computer program not only ends up having agency within the computer, but then it's no longer even just, at least you're like, well, at least it's only stuck in the computer. I can turn it off or go away, move away from it, right? Here it's like, oh no, I'm going to follow you. I'm going to climb out of this computer and come after you. I thought that was very cool and scary. Like when the lasers started to heat up and Dillinger was like, I have no idea what they're about to print. Oh my God. I thought that was so great. And it turns out the lasers that are doing the printing are the very same lasers that put organic material into the computer, onto the grid. You just reverse them. You just revert. Again, the laser is the actual bridge that they're referring to. And Flynn got digitized in the very first movie and put on the grid. So while some are questioning here how a 3D printer can make flesh and blood, well, that's been a rule in the franchise since the very first film, because Flynn not only goes into the computer, but eventually comes out still as a human being with flesh and blood. So I think, the movies, they're very far and few, they're like 1982, 2010 or something, and then 2015. So it's long periods of time between. And I think, it can be quite jarring, as I said, to see a 3D printed human being, how did that happen? But, it's always been a leap that this franchise has taken. So before Dillinger escapes into the grid at the end of the movie, first he kidnaps Eve earlier in the film by putting her into the computer. So it's a little bit, like he tried to do it to someone else and then out of desperation has to do it to himself. So he sucked her into the computer to get the Permanence Code because she was carrying it on herself. But when they almost got her, she, took the device she was carrying it on, broke it in half and threw it into the water. I'd be like, maybe, I don't know. I guess that totally rendered it useless. So they were like, but she's seen it. I was like, did she read every single line of code? I don't understand how she had the Permanence Code inside of her. But the movie said, we can, since you've seen it, we can strip it out of you. But the problem is that it could very likely kill your computer program, and therefore you can't be redigitized back into the real world. So it will effectively kill you. Or as they said, delete you. It's, I guess, they're like, delete. And Eve was like, what do you mean delete? Okay, so how did Ares and Eve eventually get the Permanence Code once they escaped from Dillinger and got back out into the real world? Well, they had to go back into the computer, but this time into Flynn's grid, because where the Permanence Code came from the first time was a backup floppy disk of Flynn's server. I don't know why they just didn't look at his original server to begin with, but maybe they knew there'd be a copy of Flynn in there or something, and they could just ask him, which is what they did. But they're like, we're going to send you on to the, maybe they didn't know it was there, but since they found it on the backup, that meant it was there, whatever. So they were like, I didn't question it when I was watching the movie. So they're like, we're going to send you into the actual server. Maybe because that's probably what it was. Like they didn't know where it was on the server. And Eve was like, I'm not volunteering to digitize myself, but she had a computer program that was like, baby, I was born on a grid, send me. So that's probably what it was, All right. So, they had recreated Flynn's original office in ENCOM headquarters. It's a nostalgia play, but what do you know? It was still fully functional. And I thought that was nice. I like that nod back to the original movie. I love they had that when Athena was chasing Eve through the offices, they had the old pinball machines, arcade games and stuff like that. I thought that was all really great because, of course, that all is part of how we've gotten to where we are today in terms of technology. It might just seem like games, but that's all had a impact on the, those are building blocks in the evolution of technology, which is also very interesting. So Ares goes back on the 1980s grid in the old server, and that's where he meets Flynn, and he just asks him for the Permanence Code. And then having Ares rematerialize, because, the laser is destroyed by Athena, so they're like, how are we going to print him back out? But there's a back door with the original lasers from the last two films still set up at Flynn's old arcade in the hidden office. And I thought that was a really nice touch. I thought that was great to have that callback. And now Ares is a real boy because he has the Permanence Code. So let's talk about the Permanence Code. Now, for most of the movie, they make it seem like the Permanence Code is going to make the 3D printed things not only not de-res, but be like immortal or invulnerable, right? Still retaining their computer elements. Instead of Pinocchio turning into a real boy, he would remain wooden, but he just wouldn't fall apart, right? Like, that's how they made it seem. But Flynn is like, oh no, it's an impermanence code in many ways because it makes you real, right? And real life is inherently, flawed, and that's the beauty of it, et cetera, et cetera. Because Ares, after getting the code, is not invulnerable or immortal. He can now be killed. They say, you only get, one time, but, it can last as long as you can make it last. The metaphor is off, but I got what they were going for. So it makes the 3D things real, I guess, the impermanence code is the spark of life, I guess, in some ways. But then, since they use the impermanence code on that tree, that orange tree that they printed in Alaska, yes, it would last longer than 29 minutes, but then because it was now a real tree, wouldn't it therefore not be able to survive in those temperatures? Wouldn't it need to have roots go into the ground because it had become real? The one-to-one didn't work. If Ares is now a real boy who can be killed and has the vulnerabilities of a living thing, well, then so would the tree. Shouldn't that have been an apple tree, by the way? That really bothered me. And by the way, I'm not eating anything that's digitally printed. I don't care what Kevin Flynn says. Would you? But I thought it should have been an apple tree to keep it the whole, her name is Eve, tree of knowledge, new life, that whole thing. I'm just, the orange was, they were a little sloppy in the metaphors or analogies or whatever. And then, so how do the good guys end up winning in the end? Well, in addition to getting the permanence or impermanence code. Well, ENCOM's top employees, they have to hack into the Dillinger systems grid and they send a corrupt file into it. I thought that was pretty funny when they were like, oh, incoming file not recognized. And it was just like, it would have been hilarious if like a folder floated down from the sky. But it comes down the chute and it blows up the grid. And you think that it's destroyed the Dillinger systems grid, but instead it's just kind of corrupted it or wreaked havoc. And that's why when Dillinger goes into his own grid to escape the police, there's some place for him to be. Now, this stopped Athena because, she couldn't reject, her program was destroyed when they kind of hurt the grid. So, because she would just come back every 29 minutes. She'd be like, oh, I de-resed, but I'm just going to reprint myself. But that couldn't happen anymore. But as I said, it's destroyed, kind of, but it's still there because Dillinger is in it. And I do wonder if destroying the Dillinger systems grid is what allows the Sark program to reemerge after being, and maybe the ghost of his grandpapa Dillinger in there, right? Maybe ENCOM actually released those things, which would be also very interesting. All right, finally, I want to talk about my two favorite scenes in the movie. I thought the scene where Dillinger hacked ENCOM servers was so inventive. I loved it. To reimagine this digital interaction with keystrokes as Dillinger's security programs, aka soldiers, conducting a raid on ENCOM servers, which are on their grid, this beautiful castle/fortress in the sky. It felt very video gamey. And then also you could see the real world components, Dillinger in his office with the keystrokes, and watching the code, which we saw as actual actions. And then also the people working at ENCOM, on break, watching the computer, or not, in this case, not paying close attention because they were doing something. I think they were playing an ENCOM game. I just thought that was all really fun. I, in fact, think the sequence could have been much longer to really kind of feel like you were in a video games scene, and much longer and more elaborate. And that also would have added more action to the film. But I just thought it was really great. It put a smile on my face to see them climbing up the wall of the castle when the scene started. But by far and away, the longest and most elaborate sequence in the film is the light cycle chase. And, no surprise there. The light cycles are not only iconic for the franchise, but are what the very popular attraction features. All right, so it's a cool and beautiful sequence to look at for sure. But only when, I enjoyed this new movie, I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. So I was like, let me go back and look at some of the, the clips from the older movies. And it occurred to me why this scene was the way that it was. All right, so in the original Tron, Light Cycle is actually an arcade game designed by Flynn. I think they should have played that up more here. These are things that they could have, I think, set up a little bit better in the movie itself. So yes, in the original Tron, Flynn wrote a game called Light Cycle, and he has to play it himself once he's in the computer to win the day and to move forward. But the lines behind the light cycles aren't just cool to look at, but they're a part of the game. And by creating that line in the way that you maneuver on the board, it allows players to play both defensively and offensively. In Tron Legacy, they play the same game, but this time with superior graphics, which not only have better visuals, but allow for greater mobility. It's supposed to show the difference in the evolution of gameplay, I think. But then here, Tron Ares, because, graphics aren't, Tron Legacy was cutting edge in its day, and you can't really improve on those graphics at all. So what they do is they bring the computer game into the real world, which I think really talks about how the line between the digital and the real world is getting thinner and thinner and, fading away as technology advances. So here you have a situation where it's the same sequence, but now taking place in reality. So that's the evolution of the Tron light cycle sequences. And when you understand that, I think the sequence makes a lot more sense. All right, so that's my spoiler. And it's, by the way, and again, it's on the movie for not doing a better job of setting that up because it is really cool. All right, so that's my spoiler review of Tron Ares. What do you think of these interesting elements, questions, Easter eggs for the franchise, and potential sequel ideas? Share those thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.